This is Speaking of Shakespeare, conversations about things Shakespearean. I'm Thomas Dabbs, recording this conversation from Aoyama Gakuin University in central Tokyo. This conversation is with Heidi Craig of Texas A&M University and also general editor of the World Shakespeare Bibliography. Before we begin, I should add that this program is funded with institutional support from Aoyama Gakuin University and also from a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science. Hello, Heidi. I finally have you here. I'm excited because I had to sort of, I wouldn't say beg you. You were better prepared to talk with me after some things come to fruition in, let's say, 10 months or so towards the end of the year. And you are of a point of your career, right? And I'm in a point of my career. When it's a pandemic, when it's me being my age and in a certain demographic, the thought comes to your mind that you might not see the end of the year. So if I'm going to talk to Heidi, I better do it now, right? So I sort of pressed you a little bit, and you have been absolutely fabulous about coming on. I know that you are extremely busy. And so this is Heidi part one, where we anticipate what's coming up, which I think is going to be wonderful for people who are in the same nerd zone that we're all in. And so welcome to the program, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. I mean, this is such a delight and so generous of you to invite me for not one, but two meetings. And so thank you. And thank you also to the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science and also AGU in Tokyo. It's really such a delight to be invited. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, I know that you are I don't know if you call it transplanted, you're a Canadian, and you're pretty Canadian. You went right through education, so forth, ended up at University of Toronto, and then from the great north, you've come south into College Station, where they have quite a lot of, I see as in all good ways, a hot zone for digital development, innovation, and really it's an extraordinarily strong faculty. Looking at your background, I cannot think of a better place for you to be. And so you are the general editor of the World Shakespeare Bibliography.
The World Shakespeare Bibliography, also known as the WSB, is the premier resource for finding scholarship about Shakespeare, as well as the most comprehensive database of translations, adaptations, and professional performances of his works. International and multilingual in scope, the WSB currently has over 135,000 annotated and cross-referenced entries and over 1 million reviews. The World Shakespeare Bibliography is published in association with the Folger Shakespeare Library and Texas A&M University. The bibliography contains annotated entries about articles, books, chapters, dissertations, editions, performances, adaptations, and digital projects related to Shakespeare. The World Shakespeare Bibliography began in print in 1950 and launched online in 2001. I'm part of a big team, a wonderful team of editors of the WSB. So there's me as general editor, and also Chris May and Dorothy Todd, who are the associate editors. And between the three of us and our fabulous group of international correspondents spread out across the world, our graduate student fellows and our undergraduate interns, it really is a team effort. And we're also partnered with the Folger, who takes care of some things like the tech side, and Oxford University Press deals with subscriptions and those sorts of things. So it truly is a team effort. And, the WSB, what makes it great is the collaborative spirit.
So Atlas has a team. So as a team, so that is much better. And the delegation of that, I wanted to focus very strongly on the connection with the Folger, of course. And you can explain this in technical terms too. The site is hosted by the Folger. And I think that Eric Johnson and his team are very directly involved with the World Shakespeare Bibliography. And we've interviewed Eric on this show, and you were a long-term fellow at the Folger before arriving in College Station. And everybody, by the way, seems to just love you there. I mean, every time oh, you have to talk to Heidi about this. You have to, but anyhow, so that seemed to have gone extremely well. And so you are still in a relationship with the Folger, as are we at Aoyama Gakuin. They're putting up some of our Bibles. This is a little lemonade stand compared to what you're doing. And so there's no world being held up, but they are going to put some of our rare Bibles on their Miranda platform and have already done one. And we are probably going to do a few more to show how you can collaborate rare material when we don't have the resources to mount on our images and to build that type of platform. You know what I'm talking about, right? There's a lot that goes into building these platforms. And tell me how this works. It seems to me that you have a group of people at Texas A&M who are working in collaboration, also in collaboration with the Folger.
Yes, exactly. So the editorial team is housed at Texas A&M. So there's myself, Chris May, associate editor, Dorothy Todd, who's recently joined us as associate editor. And then we have a team of graduate student fellows who do the bulk of reading the articles and annotating the articles and the performances and the books and these types of things. And then we have our undergraduate fellows or undergraduate interns who do things like ordering books from the library, entering data into spreadsheets, and we annotate hundreds of entries a week. So this really is a huge enterprise. So the editorial team is at Texas A&M, and the Folger takes care of the technical side. As you might imagine, we have thousands of subscribers, institutional subscribers, individual subscribers. They access the site online, and sometimes little things crop up, little bugs as these things happen, and the Folger team is there to ensure that subscriptions can happen smoothly and everyone can get online and get the data they need and the information they want. So really we work closely with the Folger to make sure that the information that we upload and we enter is accessible by our wonderful subscribers.
And we're one of them at my
Yes.
university. So we had a little trouble. I had a little trouble. You have to punch another button. It's in Japanese. You have to kind of go through in Japanese. And sometimes I miss the buttons in Japanese. But anyhow, yes. And they're also in Japan, I'd say maybe somewhere between 8 to 12. Is it correspondents? Is that, am I using the right word? To people you use to bring you in.
Shakespeare studies has a long and storied history in Japan, and scholars in Japan contribute greatly to the World Shakespeare Bibliography. The WSB has had several correspondents from Japan since its inception. Professor Takashi Sasaki of Musashino Gakuin University is currently the active WSB correspondent based in Japan, although I should mention that we are not limited to one correspondent per country. Professor Sasaki is chief editor of Shakespeare News from Japan, an annual publication that surveys monographs, book collections, articles, and editions related to Shakespeare. Thanks to contributors like Professor Sasaki, we have about 4,400 WSB entries on Japanese language scholarship and performance in Japan. We also have entries on English language scholarship and performance in Japan. Recent additions include Tetsuo Kishi's Japanese language translation of Much Ado About Nothing, published in 2020. Hiroshi Matsuoka's The Spectacularity of Madness, the representation of Bedlam beggars in King Lear, published in the Kumamoto Journal of Culture and Humanities in 2019. Director Kumabayashi Hiro Takata's Japanese language production of As You Like It was produced by the Tokyo Metropolitan Theater in 2019. The WSB's peerless coverage of global theatrical entertainments continues in the era of COVID-19, including entries on virtual performances and annotations of articles about theater companies' responses to the crisis. We warmly welcome submissions on performances or indeed on any other aspects of scholarship and performance related to Shakespeare.
Over the period of time that we're doing the Heidi series, right? I would like to work with you. I think two of the listed correspondents have gone to the hereafter. And I think there's some young people who are absolutely exquisite, who are great, who might be interested. And also, I understand too that new media is probably a something of a priority.
Yes, absolutely. So I will say first, I'd like to speak to the international correspondents. So we list all of our correspondents who have contributed historically since our inception in 1950. So if people have contributed, even if they have shuffled off that mortal coil, their service is commemorated on the WSB. And we mark our current active contributors with an asterisk. So for example, right now, Professor Takashi Sasaki is our active contributor,
Yes.
based in Japan, and he is the editor of Shakespeare News from Japan,
Yes.
an annual publication that surveys, as you know, the year's monographs, book collections, articles, editions of Shakespeare, and he forwards that directly to us, which is really, the Shakespeare News from Japan is a crucial resource that ensures the WSB is informed about what's happening in Japan, because the WSB is interested in Japan, we're interested in India, we're interested in Argentina, everywhere, but really Shakespeare Studies has a long and storied history in Japan, so Shakespeare News from Japan is really a crucial resource to make sure we know what's happening in Japan.
Yeah. Well, and we've talked to, of course, I said earlier, we talked with Eric about the holdings that are here. And there's been a lot of work done to catalog those holdings. And there's a lot of work out there in terms of manga and productions and any kinds of Shakespearean things that are happening. And in fact, I'm writing about that with a couple of Japanese scholars who know a lot more. They're a good bit younger than I am, and they know a lot more about what has happened over the past 2 decades in terms of manga influenced by Shakespeare and some really interesting things that really have not gotten the international attention that they deserve. So I'm hoping that maybe we can collaborate in the future, and we'll talk to Professor Sasaki, and I'm certain he is very well informed on all of these things. And maybe if we can ever get into a post-pandemic era, right? We used to say when things return to normal. No one really says that anymore. But post-pandemic, maybe we can get you here, and you can meet these people and talk to them and so forth. If you're willing to jump on one of those big tin cans and go across the Pacific Ocean.
That sounds wonderful. I would love to do that. In a post-pandemic world, that will be a beautiful thing to do.
Yeah, well, we would love to have you here. Well, that's the World Shakespeare Bibliography. I wanted to look a little bit into your research, and let's see, I wanted to make sure we covered this. Yeah, this is a collaboration at TAMU, and I understand the division of labor now. And I feel better now that you aren't alone, that you are surrounded by wonderful support from more than just your institution, 2 institutions, and also people from places all over the world contributing to this. But you do work on some really interesting stuff. And it makes me want to be like a graduate student again, because you're doing Paratexts. And explain Paratexts to people who may be get a little glossy-eyed about the idea of what that is.
Yes, so the word Paratexts was coined by Gerard Genet, a French literary critic. And the Paratext is essentially the printed matter that surrounds what we call the text. So things like the title page, the opening preface, the address to the reader, the table of contents, all the materials that surround a book or surround a text that isn't strictly speaking, the textual or literary content. I'm really interested in early modern dramatic paratexts. So things that those can be theatrical and also, printed matter. So you might have a cast list, a prologue, an epilogue, or you might have, a title page or a dedication. So all this matter that, framed the book or framed the play in the case of early modern dramatic paratexts, really, transforms how we perceive the play proper. So, reading Hamlet, it's a very different experience if you read Hamlet surrounding by all its, early prefatory matter, versus just reading it sort of in isolation. And these paratexts really make meaning. And it's interesting to think, sometimes we think, Gerard Jeanette argued, you can't have a paratext without a text. You can't just have a table of contents without the material that it describes. Yeah. But I would argue actually that you can learn a lot just from the paratext, studying them as objects of literary interest in their own right. Because some of these things, for example, they can be commendatory poems, which are worthy of, they're sort of literary artifacts in their own right. But even things like title pages, which don't necessarily immediately seem like, literary artifacts, they can tell you a lot about, historical information about who printed a play, where it was printed, a theater company who put it on. So you can really learn a lot from these sort of framing materials. And I'm just sort of, sometimes I think the paratext is more interesting than the text itself. It's like, who staged this play? When was it printed? Who wrote a commendatory poem? So you can really learn a lot about the context in which these plays were performed, published, and consumed by the framing matter. So this is really what I'm sort of crazy about at the moment.
Well, you're talking to someone. I had maybe 6 years ago, I had some surgery and I had to go through a rehabilitation period. Nothing really major, but there was a small rehabilitation period of about 2 or 3 weeks where I wasn't as mobile as I normally am. And so I printed off 10 years, a decade's worth of the ESTC to try to locate titles of publications. Don't tell anybody I told you this, okay? This even nerds call this nerdy. But I just found reading through the titles from the and the EST, the short title catalog, the English short title catalog out of the British Library. But I was planning to work on something involving Shakespeare, and it just was amazing how much it provided in the way of interpretive power. And Genet, I think probably you would call a hermeneuticist, if I'm saying that right. I mean, he's in that school of hermeneutics where the theories of interpretation, and how when a text is contextualized, right, within itself. And I'm thinking, and I wonder if you're thinking the same thing, not only the title pages, but we know a lot more about bookshops and locations in London, and where in the ambulatory world and the quotidian world, someone might encounter a text and the environment in which they may encounter it and how they may first see it, right? So I think this is all absolutely fascinating. And your recent focus is on prologues and epilogues, which are clearly para. They can be added afterwards or written before, or stuck in. So tell us a little bit about your prologues and epilogues.
Yes, so one thing, as you say, Tom, one thing about prologues and epilogues, even though they are, we think of them as theatrical materials, we chiefly encounter them in print. And often they are created at a different moment in time from the play proper. So I'm thinking, for example, when Marlowe's Jew of Malta was printed belatedly in 1633, there's a preface that alludes to the fact that it was a revival, and that it's sort of apologetic that the revival actors might not be as good as the originals, but we would work with what we can. Or for instance, there's just another similar prologue that was appended to the third edition, I think it was, of George Chapman's Bussy d'Amboise, and they apologize again that the original actor Nathan Field is dead. The second actor is too old to perform the play. So now we have the third man. And this poor third man isn't even named. We think it's Hilliard Swanson, but it's just sort of like, oh, the third guy, third actor, he's okay. He's no Nathan Field. But so you can really, and this was printed, so you can imagine when, Nathan Field was long gone by the time this Chapman's play was printed, and the third actor was just sort of mentioned, as a substandard fill-in for Nathan Field. So you can really learn a lot about, theatrical, the sense of theatrical continuity, traditions, how the, batons were passed from one actor to another as each sort of performed different roles. So I find this really, it's a moment, the sort of prefatory matter is often, takes part of the modesty topos. So they apologize for the, potentially substandard quality of the play. it's sort of typical. But in order to do that, they sometimes get some very pointed, very personal descriptions of why the play is not, up to standard. So I just think that, for example, that The Third Man is just sort of devastating. And I talk about that in a upcoming, forthcoming publication that's coming out in an edition or a special collection edited by Emma DePledge and Rachel Willey. But so that's one thing I'm thinking about. What we can learn about the theater from printed text is something I'm very interested in. And the
Third
Paratexts
Man,
really
The
a
Third
crucial
Man.
part.
Well, that echoes in Orson Welles, that movie. So that you're good there. I mean, that just immediately echoed to me. And also, I'm a third son, so very often the names of the first two brothers were saying, "You guys get in the car," and that other guy.
I'm the third daughter of.
Oh, you're a third daughter.
Sometimes even the dog gets top billing before me. It's like,
Oh,
you again.
My mother would go through and she'd say, Gene, Reese, David, and my name is Tom. And she would go through all the brothers and then say, no, Tom, would you please go do this? And one time she called me by the dog's name.
It has happened to me. Yes, Tom. It's the third one. It's
third child. Now, Heidi, I will say that there are a lot of pressures that we did not have to endure. As sometimes is not sometimes you don't want to be ignored, but sometimes you do.
They cleared the path. They cleared the path.
And they cleared the path
a little later than my sisters did, certainly.
Yeah. And to get to go through life not feeling you're really super special, that takes a lot of pressure off of you, because you have to put a lot of psychic work into being special. I've decided as a third child, but we're being a little bit discriminatory toward first children and last children. So I'll move on a little bit. This is kind of a paratext. I am interested though in this and what you're saying. You were in an edition that was edited by Tiffany Stern, and I'm interested in how, I don't want to say in my day, but when I was training, there was a fairly clear division between people who were bibliographers and people who were considered critics, or that kind of division between people who were interpretive, that wrote articles and put them in journals about how to interpret things, and then other people who were doing hardcore bibliography. And I felt at that time, and I think that I have done some research to this end, and you certainly are doing it, that there's no border there. There is both. They can cohabitate peacefully together and need each other.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
You're doing that, and Tiffany Stern, one of my favorite, scholars out there, does that. The hardcore historical evidence, hardcore bibliography, and then moving around and looking at these things in interpretive fashions, which I'm going to go into the gender studies that you do, but more than that, you also are looking at work and space. And this, not only just the spaces of the theater, right?
Right. Well, it's interesting. You think sometimes we think of book history and bibliography on one end, and then you have the more sort of interpretive work, and then on the other end you might have theater history. But scholars like Tiffany Stern, Claire Bourne is another wonderful scholar who really shows that these the intersections of all these things. And when you put bibliography into conversation with theater history and, interpretations of the literary artifact, things, magic happens. And yes. I think really, I think of, the text is something you can analyze as a historical artifact, and the historical artifact, if you think of the playbook as a material object, you can sort of read that as you would a literary creation. So I think sort of putting on your bibliographer's eyes to read something, and then putting on your critic's eyes to look at a physical object, those skills are really sort of reinforce one another.
Well, you can see it is the thing. When you get into the what a lot of people would consider the weeds, when we get familiar with the turf in there, and I should have included theater history, because it isn't just, we're not looking just at bibliography and criticism, which basically are kind of print-based to text-based, but we're also envisioning the physical space a lot more these days, and also looking more at production, at modes of production in theater and what surrounded theater. And I see that in your work. You can come back at any moment if you want to talk a little bit more about Paratexts, but I was going to move on to what really, really, really excites me, because the rag women and the rags. And that's you go from this collection of bibliography of text, of books, of printed material, and it segues smoothly into theater space, that sort of thing. And then we get out into the world of people who are part of the production, the line, what would we call the modes of production and their lives. And you've done some fascinating work on rags, and explain rags to us, please.
Hey, thank you so much, Tom. That's so generous of you. So this is a newer project, but I'm really excited about recovering the importance of rags and rag collectors to the early modern textual industry and the papermaking industry. And the way I came across these rag collectors was actually through, Thomas Berger's Index of Dramatic Character. So I was reading this playlet published in the 1650s called "The Women Wear the Breeches," and there's this character Joan Ruggles, who's a rag picker or a rag raker, and I thought, I don't really know what profession that is. Her friends were laundry women and oyster wenches and so forth. So I looked up in Tom Berger's classic Index of Dramatic Character, and I realized that according to that book, there's only one instance of a rag raker, and it's Joan. So I looked a little deeper into what this entailed, what type of work she would do, and I discovered that essentially rag pickers who picked all sorts of things out of the rubbish. One crucial role they played was picking out rags that were recycled and processed into paper for writing and printing. And when you come across descriptions of paper making, often the first step is take your rags and then make paper. But I was interested in that moment, what happens before you have the rags? I mean, where do the rags come from? They don't just appear. And as I did some digging, I realized that this, rag collection, rag sorting really depended on, vast groups of people who are, generally pretty, non-elite people, to say the least, people who are impoverished, itinerant, often people didn't leave records of their own lives because they were, less literate. And so these people who were doing work that was, pretty unpleasant, picking out rags from garbage heaps, trading them with other people. And these rags were, I should say that the perfect rags for making paper are pretty worn down. They're pretty grubby. Brand new, fresh rags aren't good for making paper because you want the tender rags that are easy to beat into a paper pulp. So these rags, when the rag rakers collect them, they're pretty yucky. So you can imagine the people, who were doing this crucial work for the paper industry were actually stigmatized by this work because it was, even though it was very skilled, it was rather unpleasant. So I just like to think about how the artifacts that we treasure, these marvelous quartos and folios that have lasted for 400 years, that the reason why they have lasted so long is because they were printed on rag paper, which was the rags had to be collected by these people who are, in contrast to the high status folios, for instance, relatively low status. So it's just interesting to think about the juxtaposition of these treasured literary artifacts and the people who are, responsible for making them in many ways, at least the first step in making them.
Oh, no, it comes straight from Hamlet, about the how a king can go through the guts of a beggar or something of that nature. The disparity between what we treasure, the special, the rare item, and then the grubbiness of the making of it. And it really connects very well with the world that we're in now, because there are large economies of salvage, particularly in underdeveloped countries, where they take all of our technological debris, and then people go in and extract the copper or any number of raw materials, and then recycle it, perhaps into the mobile phone or the cell phone that we're using, right? So I think it's very transferable to our times, what's happening there. And women in particular, that you found evidence of women in particular, itinerant, I think might be a word, but women who may be dispossessed from the cycle of society where they're married, there's income, they have their house, they do whatever people do. They're sort of on the outside. It's one of these things that you have to do for survival, for basic survival. And there was a plant out there too. By plant, I mean factory. There was a guy who was a Queen's Jewelers, right?
John Stillman, yes.
Stillman, yes. And he had the big
John
factory.
Spellman, I'm sorry, Spellman.
Spellman. I'm mispronouncing it. Don't worry. We'll edit that.
We'll edit that.
Or not
John
edit it.
Spellman.
I like the process of thinking, where we're trying to gather, because let's face it, Heidi, you and I have a lot of stuff in our head. And a lot of it is useless and a lot of it is extremely important, but it's hard sometimes to separate one from the other. But anyway, he had that plant out there. And the first image I got when I was looking at your article is the old Pink Floyd album of the Battersea Park factory, right? And there's no relation, but just this early modern look forward to the industrial age. Right. And it was really very much a factory, and they depended on these rags. And I should probably tell our audience that was the raw material, not wood. Wood was used in binding and so forth, but rags. And I think was linen better than other forms of cloth?
Yes, linen rags is the most prevalent material for printing and writing paper. So there's various raw materials. If you're making rough paper to wrap, wrapping paper, wrap groceries, for instance, that's a different type of material. But the paper you want, if you're printing a book or you're making paper for people to write on, in manuscript, that would be rag paper. And it's interesting because wood pulp paper, developed later in the 19th century. But some of those books, depending if it's acid free, if the paper is very acidic, some of those books created out of this, this sort of technological progress, wood pulp paper seems to be progress, but those books are actually less sturdy oftentimes, whereas rag paper really is, really endures. And the books we have from the 17th century or the 16th century, they've held up remarkably well. And the rag paper is really part of that. But it really is, thinking of the, really the rag paper, so the process of making paper really is this early instance of modernity where it relies on, cast-offs, where people were throwing things away, which made it possible to recycle them. And also this sort of, growing industry of people, you have middle managers and you have, the labor, all these sort of people working together to create this product that isn't necessarily, doesn't seem much to do with the people who were creating it. So it's not, a printed book is not an artisanal object. It really is a mass-produced thing. So you see all these sort of these glimmers of modernity and industrialization in early modern paper making.
You really do. And this is white paper, called white paper, is that right? As opposed to brown paper. So the white paper seems to come from the grossest source. The highest quality comes from the lowest quality. It makes that transition, that metamorphosis. We could make some sort of Ovidian connection here if we wanted to get super nerd, but there is a transformational process from one person's junk becomes someone else's treasure. And this paper, of course, was very valuable and had an enormous amount of meaning. Again, is a kind of paratext in the sense that the paper itself is it indicates an expectation that you may have as a reader.
Yes, and I should say that in England actually didn't really have its own paper making industry for writing and printing paper until relatively late in the late 17th century. Usually it got its paper from continental sources, so the Netherlands, especially France, Italy as well. And there, as you can imagine, there's a lot of anxiety about what it means if you have these great English books printed on French paper. They have to import the paper, which creates sort of economic disparities. So there's sort of the economic factor, but there's also this sort of symbolic cultural anxiety where you have to go outside your own country to sort of manufacture your cultural artifacts. So, and again, England did produce, Spelman's paper mill was an exception, but usually we only see English paper mills for printing paper later on.
Well, what was that paper used for in his mill?
So his paper, it was for writing. It was for writing and printing, but that was an exception. He had to receive special permissions. He had a monopoly on rag collection. And thinking back to what you said, you said so beautifully, Tom, about how these rags that are sort of the lowest of the low, they're sort of transformed into things of great value. There was a lot of anxiety in England that rags were being sent to the continent to be processed into paper. And again, these rags are, they've been used over and over. They're sort of the grubbiest, tenderest, flimsiest rags. And you can imagine there seems to be sort of a counterintuitive to think that there's objections to sending out what seems to be garbage to other countries. But there was this anxiety that, these rags we can't, why are we sending them away? We should have a native English industry. But it took, a couple centuries for that to develop in earnest. So France was, we send our garbage to France and they send us back paper at great price. So people were very, people were pushing for a native industry, but there were various factors why it took a little bit, it was a bit difficult to establish. And Spelman's mill wasn't, it didn't spark a trend.
It didn't spark a trend. I see what you mean. Yeah, there were some things there. That's because it isn't the Industrial Revolution yet. Things happened and it didn't spark. So you can see that in history in several cases. So something happens in the 14th century, maybe a group of renegade group of Christians want to do something and it doesn't spark, but later you get the technology of print to movable type and then something is sparked. But this print did not. There was also, it was, I think London, I think they were a little bit late in silk weaving. That was more of a mid to late 17th century that they would import their silk, but they did have, I was working on Bottom, who's a weaver in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Hey,
so
yes.
I got interested in weavers and I'm still interested in weavers. And if you ever have trouble with insomnia, just ask me and I'll send you my notes on weaving in the 1590s and it'll put you.
It will keep me up to
It won't. It won't. It's sometimes I do think we can get a little bit far. I was at a conference not that long ago, maybe it's gotten to be about a decade, but I was it was one of those SAA conferences, and it was a group of people talking about historical studies in literature, which I was asked to be in the general seminar or whatnot, and not asked to be. I applied and they accepted me. Okay, so I don't want to make myself look like too big a deal, but I'm thinking history and Shakespeare, this is in 2012. Come on, are we still talking about this? But there was someone who came in and admonished our group for daring to leave the I don't know, the sacred ground, the sacred ground of the literary text is a separate, distinct, but well-wrought urn. And she was adamant about it. And I found myself, I don't know, being taken over by another Tom going, wait a second, as soon as you stamp ink on a page, you're in history, saying something like that, and being strident and preachy. And then, but I think that you are released from that in your career, in your future, that all of that has sort of subsided. We can do these things, but there probably will be a point at which somebody comes in and says, okay, now we're not going beyond rags. We'll go to rags, but we're going to draw a line. And, but I don't see why we can't just keep going.
The raw material for rags was grown, in Spain and sort of that part of Europe. And then they were importing linen to be made into clothing that people would wear. Then it'd be turned into rags. It would become rags after use, frequent use, and then they would ship it back to the continent. So you get this sort of, international cycle of, things planted and then things made into clothing, turning into rags, and then going back, being made into paper. And Joshua Calhoun has a recent book on this very, important process, or this sort of transnational cycle, and what it means culturally.
Yeah, there's just so much stuff coming out, Heidi, to keep up with, and I don't have to tell you that. This is what we're talking about. I think we should probably let the people, and particularly my colleagues in Japan, know that what we're talking about is what's the Latin term? It's a sine qua non, that without which, if you don't have paper, you don't have any record that Shakespeare existed. Right. So Shakespeare could have scribbled out something on foul papers or whatnot, and they're gone. But if you don't have this printed, of course, but then you have to have something to print it on. And of course, you have to have everything else. So this all does have to do with Shakespeare. That without which, if we did not have these movements, these things that all seem to kind of get together at the same time. And we could talk about Burbage and the theater and the Office of the Revels. And so, there was this kind of explosion of things that it was unprecedented, even though we often still refer to it as the Renaissance, nascent period. It was much more nascent. I think it just, boom, something. And it seems almost a kind of accident that.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
The sort of historical contingency, is really, the things that had to go right and that had to happen at the same time is really just incredible when you think about it in terms of, the theatrical context and the context of publication. I think it's all building on this idea of, interrogating the idea that Shakespeare is this great singular author, this mind that existed in isolation from everyone around him. Learning more about theater has really, interrogated that myth. Of course, he had Richard Burbage and his Will Kemp, and all the various actors and other people around him in the theater who were contributing to this very very collaborative enterprise. So an actor might change a word, and it might go into it might be printed in a book. Who knows? But the theater is a collaborative enterprise. So that's sort of usefully put useful pressure on that idea of Shakespeare as the singular author, but publication as well. You have the people working in the printers, you have the compositors, the people who set the type. If they set a word differently, even if it's not Shakespeare's meaning, the word will be different in Shakespeare's play, as we have it now. So the people who sold the books, the people who made the paper, the people who collected the rags, it's really a multi-agent process at the level of the theater and at the level of book production. So I think, we're realizing now that all these people had to sort of work together, and a lot of things had to go right in order for us to have these books. And even, Shakespeare's first folio, 18 of our plays, our most, treasured plays, Antony and Cleopatra, Macbeth, Julius Caesar, all these plays are printed for the first time 8 years after Shakespeare died, or 7 years after Shakespeare's died, I should say. And so that's, if things didn't go right, if Hemmings and Condell hadn't collected these plays, if Jaggard hadn't printed them, we wouldn't have Macbeth, we wouldn't have Measure for Measure. And that's really remarkable when you think, how much had to go right and how grateful we are that all these things fell into place so that we would have these, incredible plays.
Well, I agree so totally with you. I feel like we somehow were given this similar DNA in at least scholarly DNA, because the things that you were drawn to were the same sort of things that excited me, and unfortunately, sometimes not a lot of other people. So, other people were interested in talking about fairies and Midsummer Night's Dream, and I'm also interested in fairies, but I'm much more interested in the workmen, and recently and what they do, just as you were interested in rags. And then the wonderful way you have of picking, I don't want to say key words because that sounds shallow, but the third man, it's just wonderful resonance. And rags. Now, rags to riches, right? Immediately, and there was some more obscene usages of the word, but it resonates that way, and it's attention. It catches your attention, and I think it caught the attention. I just think it's wonderful. It's a wonderful way to forward work in our field, I guess is what I'm saying. And it's good because those truths are self-evident that we're doing good work. Now, I want to talk about what you are anticipating, and you don't have to, nothing has to pop out of the cake yet. If there's a surprise, if there's a surprise out there, you don't have to reveal it. But I think you have some pretty big things coming up that and that's going to be Heidi Part 2. When they come out, we're going to let people know that they're out there and you can have them. But tell us what's coming up soon.
Yes, so I'll start. It's interesting you mention, Tom, you're interested in the things that other people aren't interested in, because you're right that we share that same sort of scholarly DNA. So the current book project I'm working on and finishing up, fingers crossed, it's not a surprise, but I don't want to jinx it quite yet, is looking at what happened to English drama when the theaters were closed for 18 years between 1642 and 1660. And previously, this period is treated as a kind of dramatic dead zone. People think, oh, the theaters were closed. No one was interested in drama. The Civil War was happening, of course, which is a major, a devastating and important historical event. But the fact is, when you outlaw something, it's not as if everyone forgets about it. If anything, the opposite happens. Censorship prompts interest in many ways. So the current book I'm working on is essentially tracking what happened to drama on the stage during the theatrical prohibition, on the page, how plays were printed, and also in the cultural imagination, how drama and plays were reconceived. And I'm arguing that this is not only that the moment is sort of undeservedly overlooked, I'm arguing that it's a crucial moment for understanding, what we do now as scholars of early modern literature. So I'm saying, English Renaissance drama or early modern drama as a category really came to cohere after the theaters closed, because people had a sense of, the boundary was fixed in 1642. Everything that came before that belongs to this sort of category of the last age, as it came to be known. And so the reason why we put Thomas Kyd in the same category as James Shirley with Shakespeare, is because the theater ban was seen as a sort of watershed moment. So I'm looking at what happened to drama in that 18-year period. And it's really strangely resonant. I started this book is based on my PhD dissertation, which I completed at the University of Toronto in 2017 now. So basically I'm looking at what happens to drama when performance can't happen. And now in our moment of COVID-19, it's sort of this, it's not quite as bad, and the theaters won't be closed for 18 years, but even, when the theaters are closed or performances curtailed for 18 months, we still see how disruptive it is. Disruptive for the theatrical professionals who have to try to make a living somehow. And it's also, the innovative ways they respond, both in our own time, online performances, interactive outdoor performances and so forth. Similar things were happening in the 17th century, in the 1640s and 50s, when people were trying to figure out, okay, we can't perform legally on stage, but what else can we do? And how does this change how we think about drama? So that's a book I'm finishing up now. And it should be, hopefully when we speak again in Heidi Part 2, it'll be sort of the check will be in the mail, so to speak. But that's something it's sort of, since it's my dissertation, I'm having trouble. I keep sort of, I can't let it go quite yet, but it is, it's soon it will be ready to go out into the world.
Working title. Tell us the working title right now.
Oh, yeah. So my working title is Dead Theater, English Renaissance Drama, 1642 to 1660. And Dead, I want to argue, is really sort of, the book offers what I call a posthumous history of English Renaissance drama. And in the 1640s and 50s, there was a discourse that referred to the theater as the sort of closed theater, the prohibited theater, as a dead theatrical art form. Now, of course, plays did happen, illegal performances did happen, but rhetorically, in terms of cultural discourse, people considered it as something that was over, something that had been concluded, and something that was actually sort of killed by the government. And of course, since this is a time when Charles I was killed by the same government that closed the theaters, the metaphor was sort of inevitable that the theater was dead. So I'm arguing that the idea that theater was dead sort of informed how people thought of the playbooks. Playbooks were called relics, the treasured relics of the stage, which elevated their cultural importance. But of course, even if drama was dead in many ways in cultural discourse, it didn't disappear because people were thinking about plays, printing them, staging them illegally. So there's sort of this tension between how plays were described as dead and gone, but people were engaging with them all the time.
Again, it just captures me. Dead theater. It just captures me. And I'm absolutely sure. I can't wait. Now you have a fairly major digital project going on, and we are anticipating that. And if you could maybe give us a little bit of a preview of the project.
Yes, certainly. So with Sonia Masai, my co-editor, we are co-editors of Early Modern Dramatic Paratext, or EMDP, as we're calling it, EMDP. And what this is a digital database that will include transcriptions of all dramatic paratext in playbooks printed between the opening of the theaters in the early 16th century and the end of the start of the Restoration in 1660. So, almost 2 centuries worth of, or 150 years worth of dramatic paratext. So again, the title pages, the commendatory poems, the dedications to the reader, actor lists, cast lists, and so forth. This is going to be a database where people can search in various keywords in order to find the information they need on paratext. Now, this represents a digitized and expanded version of paratext in early English drama, which was published by or edited by Sonia Masai and Thomas L. Berger in 2014 by Cambridge University Press. So what MDIP represents is a digitized version of that printed book in a way that makes it, takes advantage of the dynamism of the digital. So you don't have to read a book. You have to read a book from front to back, essentially, or rely on an index to find what you want. But in a database, you can just put in a keyword and see what pops up, or say, I want to find all, actor lists, put that as a key term and it'll pop up. So that's one facet of it, and also adds paratext printed between 1642 and 1660, which is the era of the theatrical prohibition, which is my focus. So that will be in addition. That was not in the original printed book. So we're working on that. We did a sort of soft launch in April 2021 at the Shakespeare Association of America meeting, and we're getting ready to just sort of revamp and rebuild, and we've take what the information we've received from everyone at that soft launch to have sort of this grand launch a little later on. It might be, it's a big project, so it'll take a while, but we're really excited about this project.
How much do you is this textual? Do you have actual text, original text represented in the database?
Yes, so it's essentially, it will be transcriptions of, actual text of all the commendatory poems included in, basically all the paratext will have transcriptions of them in the database, along with all of the data associated with the playbook. So if you want to find out, for example, you want to find out about that prologue in The Jew of Malta that was published in 1633, you can type in 1633 and everything, all the paratext from that year will pop up. And you'll have a transcription, so you can read it and it'll be, searchable. You can copy and paste it. Where, if you go into EBO, early English books online, you might have to find, images of paratext, or you might have to, comb through different, some of them comb through different sort of texts to find this material. But MDIP is really a site where all paratexts, separated from the text, interestingly, we're not interested in text, just the paratext. But when you put all of these materials together into conversation with each other, you really learn a lot about both theatrical practice and also publication in the early modern period. So it's a large scale digital project, and it's a team effort. So we have our colleagues at the Folger we've been working on this together with, also received a lot of support from Texas A&M's Center for Digital Humanities Research, or CODER. So it really is, it's a huge team effort. It's something we're quite excited about. And when it's ready, I think it'll be useful. We're hoping it will be very useful for the research, for the scholarly community.
I'm certain it will. There's no doubt in my mind that it will. And it is something, you're exactly right. I was thinking while you were talking, and I get in trouble for this sometimes because people don't think I'm listening, but I'm listening, but also I have to process what you're saying. I was trying to think about what I would have to do to look for the Jew of Malta prologue in Igbo, as opposed to what you're talking about. So Igbo would be, you could go there. Well, they're two different. There's sort of a text Igbo and but it would be something that it could be time consuming, and it might be a little bit hard to find depending on which paratext you're looking for. And this also includes tributes to patrons, you were saying earlier, right? Which is a huge, huge area of consideration. In terms of, so paratexts are any of those things in the first folio. I'll just go to a mundane example. It's just bracketed by, the Johnson poem, this and this and this and this. And that was so absolutely necessary and important for its production. Else what follows, as you said, we wouldn't have it, if that was not organized in a way that would make it, I guess, financially feasible to publish and something of interest to distribute. Well, excellent. Heidi, let's see here. I want to talk a little bit before I let you go. Was there another thing
I should say also, just to, with WSB, I am also working on, the WSB is its own sort of research, provides research opportunities in its own right. With Laura Estel, who is the previous editor of the World Shakespeare Bibliography, we've been working together to publish various articles on the World Shakespeare Bibliography as as a resource, particularly for global Shakespeare. So we're publishing an article on digital Shakespeare in the global South, which is really exciting. And what we're interested there is, obviously Shakespeare studies, Shakespeare scholarship happens around the world, and publication is an important part of that, but also not only publishing articles, but also being able to find them is really crucial. So we're talking about how the World Shakespeare Bibliography plays a crucial role in making global Shakespeare studies accessible and findable by sort of aggregating it in one place. So that's something I want to acknowledge my collaborator with, Laura Estel in that regard. And I have to say, again, whether it's EMDP, Paratexts, or WSB, all these projects really are, wonderfully collaborative. It's Atlas. It's a group of Atli. So that's really, I have to give a shout out to Laura Estel as well.
Well, please do, because the work the wonderful work that she's done over time. There's so many people that are mentioned in our conversation. Heidi, I did get to see you at the Digitizing the Stage conference in 2019, which is a special memory because it was the last one before the pandemic, and it was such a marvelous time that sounds something as an old joke, but it was something to marvel at. The setting, of course, in Oxford and what we did, but the people. And I spoke with Pip Wilcox about this, and of course Eric. And I think that the Japanese word is natsukashi, which is a feeling of nostalgia, homesickness, and so forth. I have that kind of feeling now very much about that conference, but I had the pleasure of meeting you and the others there. And I may talk to some others who were involved. And when you said, well, I don't know about your timeline, Tom, but I'll be okay at the end of this year. I thought, no, you don't understand. I don't have a timeline. I'm asking people I know kind of and like kind of who are in the area, but you fit all, as I said in an email, you check on everything. Also, including the Folger, including wanting to talk to earlier career scholars and see what you're doing, what we can expect in the future, that sort of thing. Please give my best to everybody over there in Aggie land in Texas A&M. I adore, for various reasons that I won't go into, it'd be too much of a focus on me, but I adore that region of the world. I love to see things on the move, you know, and I remember times when certain universities would go on the move, or certain departments, and A&M is on the move. And I really, really am happy to see you there, and my best to your colleagues also there too. But again, thank you so much, Heidi, for coming on. My colleagues here in Japan and throughout the world will be just delighted to see and hear from you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be here, Tom. Thank you again for this wonderful invitation. And it's been so fun to speak with you. I also shared that sort of nostalgia for digitizing the stage in 2019, but this has been really, you know, so wonderful to, you know, touch base and chat. And it's been great. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hey, do you think we can do this post-pandemic now that everybody is zoomed in? I would like to continue the series even when we can actually see each other, because I'm 8,000 miles away from you, right?
Well, that's, I think, you know,
and other people.
Absolutely. I think, you know, as you had the perfect phrase, Tom, the post-pandemic world. We're not returning to pre-pandemic world. No. We're going to take these, you know, sometimes hard-earned lessons and make the most of them in the, you know, in the future. And I think, you know, certainly I've been Zooming with colleagues, you know, during the pandemic, I Zoom with my colleagues in the UK, in Japan, in Australia, you know, people who I wouldn't necessarily think to have lunch with because, you know, there's people next door. But when everyone's at home, you know, you can have lunch with someone in the UK as easily as you can have lunch with someone who lives next door to you. Of course, they're having dinner while you're having your lunch. But you know, I think we will continue to make the most of these digital collaborations, because it's been so rich. That's been, you know, certainly one silver lining of the pandemic is connecting with people across the world.
Well, yeah, and it's connected to your research. I just connected. I'm sorry, I'm doing a double. We do this in Japan all the time. We say goodbye, and then there's a pause, and you have to say goodbye again. So we're doing that, and I like it. But the thing is, we're talking about technologies and how they advance other movements in production, right? So the telephone came out, and we see something like, well, I'm thinking in The Great Gatsby, we see Tom Buchanan leave the table to go answer the phone. And at that time, that was a big deal to have your own phone in your house, right? 1920s. But before the pandemic, we had this technology. It was there. And it wasn't that it was too expensive, but it was just not on our radar. And so the phone was available before people had phones and began to use phones and develop I won't call it an art, but a way of using phones. How long should a conversation be? You know, how should you manage? How many rings before you hang up? If you can remember that period of time, you know, well, you still have that in the mobile phone, you know, what's polite? And when I was young, it was 10 is maximum.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yes.
But this was in South Carolina, where one was and then 4 days later was the second ring. It gave old people at that time plenty of time to walk down the hallway. You know, the phone wasn't with you, right? And in Japan, it's like bring. So 6 or 8 times is not that much. But anyhow, there were protocols, and we're doing that with Zoom now and with, you know, other forms of conferencing. And so I just love seeing that. And I just see it paralleling what you're doing in your research in digital and also in your critical perspectives. So again, thank you. And I just see wonderful things for Heidi in her future.
Well, thank you, Tom. Well, I mean, it's really been, that's so generous of you to say, and I want to, you know, live up to your regard. That's my goal for next time, having, you know, having these things come to fruition. But again, it's been so wonderful speaking with you, and thank you for this opportunity. And again, thank you to AGU in Tokyo and the Japan Society for the promotion of